Today I want to talk about Lincoln Riley and what he's had to say about being offensive coordinator and head coach at the same time, and all that's coming up after the bumper.
Don't be cornering me. Hold up. Time. You gotta help me with that corner shit.
What's up, kinfolk? It's RJ Young. I am not on a step mill. Consider hitting the like and subscribe button because I upload a video every single day. It's always college football related, sports related. We have a good time today. I want to talk about Lincoln Riley and what he had to say during his press conference this week, post Kansas State loss and ahead of the Iowa State game at Jack Trice Stadium this Saturday. And he covered a number of topics, not the least of which is he doesn't feel like his team is bad. He doesn't feel as if his team played badly. He thinks that his team made some really costly errors, and those errors are all correctable. We shall see, Lincoln. We shall see. And this is at a time when he really even went to the 1-2 start that they had a few years ago that had yours truly really asking questions about the nature of this football program. And he's right in that they pulled something out, okay? Sugar Bowl win. They've got 5 straight Big 12 championships. Season's not over. Rattler, he also said, look, the natural progression of a quarterback, young quarterback who made some mistakes, but 90 to 95% of what he did on Saturday, you want to happen. And he's got a point. 387 yards passing and 4 tutties. Like, I thought that before this season started, his season this year was going to look a lot like Baker Mayfield's in 2015. You're going to see a lot of touchdowns. You're also going to see too many picks. And you got to take that with a guy who is just learning how to do this job for the first time at this level. And I'm with that. I understand that. But I also thought it was tremendously interesting that he talked about, well, whether or not he should be wearing both hats as offensive coordinator and head coach. Now, this is the kind of topic that only gets brought up when Riley loses. And while it is not, do you think that bubble screens are still a good play to run in this day and age? A question that he was actually asked in this press conference. I'm not making that up. And he showed tremendous restraint that I would not have. He's also going, look, I don't think that doing both jobs is difficult. And obviously he doesn't because he's been doing both jobs for 3 years. He also said, I wouldn't look at what I did as an offensive coordinator or a head coach separately. I would just say that I need to do a better job because I need to do a better job. That's up there with the just do your job or do your job that the Patriots enact. But I also think that it speaks to who Lincoln Riley is. He believes that he is this guy. And he also was raised to be a head coach by that guy on the field. Mike Leach does that job. Mike Leach famously does not really have an offensive coordinator. Mike Leach is calling plays. Mike Leach hires whatever defense coordinator he thinks he can get his hands on, and that guy tries to match a defense with Mike Leach's air raid. At Washington State, it was Alex Grinch. At Texas Tech, it was Ruffin McNeil. At Mississippi State, it's Zach Arnett. And really, we'd never heard of any of those guys until Mike Leach hired them, which is why it's really interesting that Riley was at least raised on how to be a head coach by Mike Leach. I also think of it in this way. How many head coaches who also act as the play caller have won national championships, right? It's a really interesting question to ask because if you talk about Scott Frost in Central Florida, you get to 1 in 2017. But outside of that, you got to talk about Jimbo Fisher at the tail end of the BCS era, right? And into this college football playoff era. But outside of that, it's Dabo Swinney, who is a CEO head coach. Mac Brown, Bob Stoops was a CEO head coach. Urban Meyer, same thing. Nick Saban, of course. Nobody thinks of Nick Saban holding a play card since the 90s because that's not who he is, right? He is the guy who hires the guys that make those calls, and he is the guy that is making sure that everything that they're doing is a part of what he thinks they ought to be doing. Also in there is this idea that perhaps the head coach needs to be a defensive-minded guy because when it works well, in the ways that I've seen it, right, here recently, a guy that's had a defensive background is much more likely to get his hands on somebody that can go score points. Not necessarily going to have the best idea of what is going to go score points. See Texas Christian and Gary Patterson. See Mark Stoops and Kentucky. but also is going to have a really good understanding of what he needs as a play caller on defense to succeed. And defense is still the only time for which you can score without having the ball. All you got to do is take the ball away, put it in the other team's end zone. Offense, got to have the ball to score, right? Defense is always going to be more valuable in football because not a whole lot of people can do it. And if you can score more points than them, you win the game. That's how that goes. I invest a lot of time into defense. I invest a lot of time into understanding corners and defensive backs. One of the reasons why I'm so enthusiastic about being on the Jim Thorpe Award selection committee, because I believe defensive back is the most important player on a football field, especially the ones that can play 5 different positions, right? Defensive tackles are harder to come by, but find me a slot corner, find me a couple of corners that are really, really great, and I'm going to show you a great football team. Now, as it pertains to Riley and him calling plays and him being the head coach, I think that he's going to do this for as long as he's a head coach. The more I think about him ceding the play calling privileges, the less likely I think it is to happen. Because look at what Gus Malzahn is. He ceded the play calling privileges to Chad Morris, but I think that's come under some pressure, and because Chad Morris is Chad Morris. Riley has done this job for 3 years, and by the time he's in his 50s, he will have done this job for the better part of 20 years. Unless he gets fired, which is a tremendous if at this point in his career, I don't see him just being an offensive coordinator. And if he ever gets another head coaching job elsewhere, I don't see him hiring an offensive coordinator to call plays. Perhaps you hire the kind of guy that is like your chief strategist, not unlike what Malzahn had last year before hiring Chad Morris. But I look at like Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin, who hired Jeff Lebby away from Central Florida last year, who was offensive coordinator for Josh Heupel in a year in which they were really good. Lane Kiffin's still the dude calling the plays because there is a feel for that, right? You do understand the rhythm of events. You do understand what you see in real time, and you have an understanding that you want to have as closely tethered as possible to your quarterback. And if you are the kind of guy that can be drift compatible with any quarterback on the field, you probably need to be the play caller. And that's Lincoln Riley's real genius. Like we talk about him as, or I should say my best friend talks about him as a painter, an oil painter who just happens to coach football. The reason I believe that Lincoln Riley's been so good at his job is because he can get into a Jaeger with any quarterback and pilot. That is not a skill that many people have. Getting along with all walks of people and getting along with all groups of people is just not a skill that everybody has. The only other guy that I know who is a greater connector of people and understands people in that way is my buddy Jerry Ostrowski, who played offensive line for 10 years in the NFL and is just a tremendous person, but can talk with anybody about anything at any moment in time and make that person feel comfortable. If you are a play caller, you have to be able to do that, right? It would be my one criticism of Jimbo Fisher. I don't know that he's always in sync with his players. I think he is much more of a head coach than he is an offensive coordinator, and yet he made his name as an offensive coordinator. So be interested to see how Riley continues to answer this question in the coming years. All right, that's it for me. Deuces.